when it comes to accuracy with regard to historical events, the two holy wars in American history would be the American Civil War to stop slavery, along with the Second World War to stop National Socialism.
Yeah.
I want to get into both of those.
Okay.
What is it that people need to know about the American Civil War that they don't?
Well, first of all, it wasn't to end slavery. You had several northern states that had slaves, and of course the piece of Virginia, which is now West Virginia, stayed in the Union and kept their slaves. Kentucky and Delaware and New Jersey didn't end slavery until the 13th Amendment, so nice 6 months after the war was over. The North still had slaves, the South didn't, and that was black slavery. And California still had Native American and Chinese slavery. They had the coolie trade for a number of years. And there's before the war, I mean, slavery was an issue that was going on at the same time as the Civil War. And it was something that was brought up in the middle of the war. Lincoln had his Emancipation Proclamation, but it didn't free any slaves. He only, like all the territories he controlled, the entire North and a little bit of Tennessee, he said slavery, we're going to keep slavery. And all the territories he had zero power in, he said, oh yeah, you guys are free. So, like, it didn't matter. He was just trying to create a slave revolt, and the opposite happened. Revolts broke out in the North, New York City in particular, where they went around hanging and lynching black people because they started blaming them for the war. Like, oh, I'm not going to war for no N-words, you know. They didn't care about whether they were slaves. Lincoln was opposed to slavery as an institution, but not because of some altruism or humanity for black people. Quite the opposite. He didn't want to expand slavery to the West because he thought it was an abomination for whites and blacks to live together at all, and that they should not ever be together. They should never come together where they're already separate. And so if they went west, don't bring the slaves with you. He wanted the blacks and whites separated. He had a plan to repatriate blacks to the Caribbean, to Panama, or back to Africa. In fact, he maintained that plan and was discussing that with his cabinet members 3 days before John Wilkes Booth, praise his name, put an end to Lincoln. That's what he was doing. It was because he thought with Lee's surrender, the war was pretty much, over. The North was going to be victorious, and he was plotting, like, what are we going to do with these blacks because they can't stay here. And when the only slaves he did free during the war, or allowed to be freed, was in Washington, D.C., because the capital of the North had slaves up until the middle of the war. And what he did was he paid the slave owners $300, and he offered any freedman $100 if he'd leave the country. And then a lot of them, of course, they put in as cannon fodder. About 10% of the Union Army was black by the end of the war. 40% of the Army was mercenaries from overseas. So almost half of the Union Army wasn't from the Union. And then Grant had his contraband camps, where about 1 million black people were in these camps, and untold thousands died from disease. If they got hurt, injured, sick, I mean, they just throw them on the wagon with injured horses and let them die. They let them starve, or they, send them in as a human wave. They didn't care. And they'd heard these rumors, oh yeah, and look, the North needed them to pick the cotton. They needed tents. They didn't have enough cotton, and that's what they did. And emancipation was a horrible thing, and let me explain, because ending slavery is a good thing, but emancipation, just cold turkey, okay, you're free. Everyone's still racist, North and South. That was very common. You don't have any skills, you can't read, but you're free. Go find a job. No one's going to hire you. You don't have to do anything except what you're doing, and they just end up becoming sharecroppers. And a large percentage of the black population disappeared between 1865 and 1900.